Good morning or afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tea with Rich. And today we are joined by a longtime friend and former coworker and cohort and golf buddy, Harvey Bierman, of now on the agency side, Red Van Workshop. How you doing this morning, Harv?
Not so bad, guys. How are you?
We're good. We're in 3 different time zones. Rich, what time zone are you in today?
Central.
Okay.
Central.
Yeah. Because you don't change clocks back in Mexico, right?
Yeah, they stopped doing it, which I hope we stop doing as well.
Yeah. Well, maybe for 4 years, but then it'll go back. That's my one political comment of the show. So, Harvey, we're super psyched to have you on here, but I know we've been talking about this for like literally since February, trying to get you on here. So, leading up to NRF, this will actually drop before NRF, which is cool. So, appreciate you making the time. And Rich, when you sent me New Year's Eve pictures, I thought you were in Chicago, so you weren't. You were in Mexico.
Yeah, those are Mexico pictures. Yeah, we're down here. So it was just Gertrude and me, so it was fun.
Yeah, I'm sure the fireworks are epic.
They were. It was fun.
Harvey, how did you spend your New Year's Eve?
In bed by 10, not worrying about where my kids were, knowing that their keys were taken by somebody else and they committed to not drive.
That's amazing. How old are your kids now?
19 and 21.
Holy shit, your youngest is not. Well, let's hold my.
And remember, my 19-year-old was probably the first Demandware baby. So
That's amazing.
Wow.
yeah, I remember when I had to go and say, like, well, what's our paternity policy? And people looked at me and I looked at them and we just kind of like figured it out.
So that would have been, yeah, 05.
05.
You're right. That's amazing. Holy cow, we go way back. What's funny is like your journey in commerce was even predates Demandware, even though that's when I met you. I met you because you kept coming up asking us to get back in the partner program. You were living in Newmar. You only lived 15 minutes away. You lived over by Callahan at the time, which is funny looking back that like you, me, Callahan, Philip, Troy, like everybody kind of was in this area.
Listen, the closest person to me was actually Wayne. Wayne lived down the street in essence.
Wow.
So yeah, in the same, which is the garage where Demandware was born in reality. In fact, the servers that supported the first launch were housed in Wayne's garage. Like it's kind of one of those garage stories that is true.
That's something nobody's actually told. Yeah,
No, for
putting,
Oh, I
sure.
got
we're
stories.
putting gardeners and vintage tub and bath and fucking oh shit, what's the bagel shop? I should know because there's
Zabar's. Zabar's is the first site in the initial Demandware launch. And if I'm truthful, on Intershop discs that were slapped with Demandware stickers installed in Wayne's garage on a server with a cartridge for order management that was built by Ixtens and Eugene Nikiforov for order management on the first version of Demandware.
That must be where Olivier and Z started saying, no, you can do order management on this thing. It does. It supports order management. Like, yeah, it does.
The term
but it's a
order
manual
management.
process.
Yeah, I don't think anybody really understood the term order management as a disassociated layer from the front end, other than Ulrika, who was in many ways the person who made sure that Demandware never included it.
Well, you know what's funny to just bring that story so far forward? When we first inherited Tom Ford, I'm like, well, what are you doing order management in? And they're like, on the platform. I was like, no. Like, which platform? They're like, this one. I was like, this one, which one? They're like, no, we're doing it in Demandware. I'm like, what? Yeah, I'm like, can you walk me through how you're doing it? So they're like going in and looking at individual orders, and that was their idea of order management. I was like, this is what you're doing like for holiday? She's like, yeah, it's really difficult. I was like, yeah, I bet it is difficult.
I think it was my second or third day of work, and Ulrika is demoing me the product in pretty significant depth. And I asked the question, I go, so what happens after the order is created and you have this authorization and you ship it? How do you get the funds? She said, well, I don't know. That's like another application's problem. I go, well, what do you mean? Like, customers are coming for us to solve this problem end to end. How are we going to solve for this? She's like, well, we would integrate to their backend system. I'm like, well, what if their backend system is some fancy B2B thing? And like, how would we do that? I don't know. That's a problem we have to solve for.
Or what if the integration drops, right?
Well,
Yeah.
that was ultimately what led to the relationship with OrderMotion, so that we could solve customers, because we couldn't solve it. And in many of the first implementations, like the primary customization was a capture feature built into Demandware because there was no backend system. And it was, in many ways, still to this day, like this really critical differentiation or decision, if you will, about the architecture of the product that defines so much of the journey so many people had to go through.
Well, there's a funny story there, which is that we were so early to everything that it was like we were journeying across the United States, and like every discovery had never been discovered before. It's like, well, how are we going to deal with this? That's a really great question.
Let's figure it
Marco
out.
would be like, let me get back to you on that. I'm like, okay, cool. Well, here's 8 others that my team came up with, but it was all, dude, we were cutting through jungle brush with every move we made. It was actually pretty funny because it was all stuff no one had actually done before. I remember before you got involved, Harvey, when they came up, Ulrika and Wayne and Stefan, and they were talking to us because we did product design at the time. That's actually how we got involved. And we are like, so what are you doing for analytics? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, like analytics, like analytics. They're like, well, analytics as in what? I'm like, like what people are doing, how long you're here, what they're buying, what they're ordering, all that stuff. And they were like, well, do you think that's important? I was like, yes, that's important. And that's how the analytics engine got built in there to track GMV, was in one of our very first conversations with, it was actually Ulrika and I mean, Wayne and Stefan was there, but I think it was Ulrika that it clicked in.
All critical conversations in early years. If Ulrika wasn't involved, it likely wasn't that material.
Or Marco. Like, I remember Marco. I mean, I think we had like a dozen, maybe a dozen and a half, like straight up German dudes working at the Pixel office in the very, very early days. Like, very early days. I'm trying to think when we did Vintage Tub and Bath and when we did Pajamagram,
It all would have been that summer of 2005, right?
Yeah,
Spring,
yeah,
summer of
it would have been
2005.
05, yeah, because I think I got involved in the spring of 04 or 05. I have to go back. I wrote it on the card that I have. But Harv, so this is a kind of funny story to have you on here, because you are brand side, then services, right? I mean, you go back to fucking GSI, right? And then
Yep.
back over to product side, back over to brand side, and now you're basically running an agency that has gone through, I want to say forced to go through, like all of them, a pretty interesting transformation over the last 18 months, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if
you're a Demandware shop, and so how is it going from approving the checks to requesting the check?
well, you remember, and not only do I have to approve them, I have to argue for the funds to get it in the first place, right? As the P&L owner for those agencies. So it's interesting, right? I get to, I have sat on all 3 sides of the triangle within the Demandware ecosystem. I'm, the steward, if you will, for an agency that is what Pixel or what, Lions might look like had it not sold, right?
Right.
We're just south of 100 people today. We're 100% onshore, 100% remote. We're 100% W2. Like, we're not a face for figure it out kind of model. We're staffed and resourced to do the work ourselves. And it's really interesting being in this seat, having bought this service, right? Co-sold this service, fired this service, helped champion these services, and have that perspective, right? And maybe a word used too often, I'll use that word empathy. It gives me empathy for all the stakeholders in the conversation, be it the platform side, be it the customer side, be it our team side.
You're the fox in the hen house and the 3 little pigs all in the one little story, which is kind of amazing.
But what's cool is it means to me that there's no winner independent of the other 2 sides of the triangle, right?
Right.
Like, it is infinitely connected. And I'll use a Philip thing, right? Philip is the one who kind of taught me a long time ago the connection between, how much time you have, how much budget you have, and what your goals or objectives are, that triangle. And it's, whenever one side of it changes, the other 2 have to react. And it's the same triangle, in the relationship between the the platform, the agency, and the customer independent of the work you're doing. And as I said, I think it gives me an empathetic perspective. It allows me to recognize that no decision is easy for anyone, but recognize the responsibility or the importance of making the decisions that need to be made. And clearly the last 18 months, since shortly after the end of COVID, have been incredibly transformational time for Demandware agencies, not just because of what happened during COVID and the acceleration of demand and just the tsunami of business, but, obviously the material enhancement of Shopify as a material competitor. And, again, I have really interesting perspective on that because I very much remember another moment at Demandware early on. And I think it was when Stefan first introduced the concept of BHAG, a term I had never heard of before. And there was a lot of questions about, do we just put a credit card swipe on the Demandware website and make this thing self-service? And a very, very strategic decision that, Wayne ultimately, God rest his soul, dug his heels in and said, no, we are an enterprise platform. We are not going to chase these 37 opportunities that Mac had for, sub-$1 million businesses and allow them to submit their credit card and everything is all automated. And that ultimate decision, like I laugh to this day, is what created the market opportunity that Shopify took advantage of, right? But don't regret it. It was a great decision for Demandware, a great decision for Shopify. And here we are now where, both of them are both challenging and struggling for the opposite ends of the spectrum.
Correct. But, a seasoned hiker can move mountains much easier than somebody that's just trying to make their way in it from basic hill climbing. And it has been interesting to watch you guys and watch Zengel and the others kind of move over there. I mean, I've been very impressed with what Shopify's been doing. People keep shitting on their B2B stuff, but it's like, the B2B sales cycles are so long that by the time they get through a sales cycle, they'll be there. It is funny you said Mac, because now I feel like I have to bring up like Tom Musil.
Yeah, still connected today. I think annually I get a request for donation for a hike he does.
Really?
Yeah, and I talked to him maybe once or twice over the last number of years. But yeah, I mean, the team early on, pre-Jeff, right? Pre-Philip.
Correct. Pre-Cali.
I was a part of that Tom Ebling,
What
was a part of
what
those
year
world.
did you start? What year did you start at Demandware?
I started on tax day 2005.
Okay.
So I think I started my journey with Stefan about 4 weeks earlier. I remember the phone call I had with him, the first interview. I was on my, wireless phone on the Tobin Bridge, trying to understand his German English to get my points across. I think it was February, right after the product launched, trying to convince him to hire me.
Wow.
And you were at the time doing what? Were you at GSI? Were you with the GSI services, or because you kind of go way back? You were doing footwear at one point, and
so I mean, I'll give my story, right? I'm a retailer at heart. It's what I've always done. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I've played on different sides of the retail transaction, right? I worked at Timberland for a little bit during grad school, but my DNA is fitting ski boots in the ski shop in Jersey, to high wealth individuals. To fit senators' kids' skis and family rentals, and the who's who of New York City metro, ski industry or ski families. And then that progressed, and I was working before Demandware. I was actually working for a company called, who was it? Oh, I was working for Shoebuy, actually. For Scott Savitz at Shoebuy. It was just a short period of time, and that was just an escape hatch for me from Global Sports Interactive or GSI Commerce, where I'd had a little bit of I don't want to call it a nervous breakdown, but trying to be executionally responsible for what Michael Rubin promises can create a lot of anxiety, especially a younger Michael Rubin. I think today is probably a little bit different, but before he was the persona and the person that he is now, he was a hustler big time, and he promised the world and then had really great people who did everything they could to deliver. For those of us that are a little bit more on the operations side, constantly under delivering gets really taxing. So I left GSI after about 4.5 years. My wife was a UNH graduate. I had loved my time in New England, and we couldn't wait to move back to New England and New Hampshire, and got this opportunity at Shopify, which didn't turn out how I wanted it, but it was a job. I was, young kid, had another one soon to be on the way. And I saw an ad for this company called Demandware. It was, I think, in the header of the internet retailer daily newsletter. It's just a banner ad, right? And to this day, I have no freaking idea what the banner ad said, but my brain processed these words. Have you ever interacted with GSI and wished the product was better? We're Demandware.
Wow.
And I mean, to this day, it's just burned into my head that's what I read. I think, I was on LinkedIn pretty early. I found this guy, Stefan. I had no idea what it was about. I think at the time, his big claim to fame was he invented the shopping cart, right? I think you guys probably remember that line, right? From Intershop. I had no idea what the heck Intershop was, but I just cold sent this guy an email and said, hey, I don't know who you are. I don't know anything about what you do, but your ad resonated with me, and I think you need to talk to me. So I created this, this dialogue with Stefan. We hit it off. I've kind of always liked Germans. They're really straight to the point. They're really technical in nature. It's not a lot of BS, right? And not a lot of emotion. Convinced him enough for him to go to the board. And really the board was himself, Michael Skoke, Larry Bond, not a very big board, right? And said, you guys should hire me. I'm a retailer. You want to sell to retailers, I could help you. And I remember when I was negotiating my, negotiating, right? It wasn't really negotiating. I was just asking for stuff I was willing to not get to take the job. And I put a list together of businesses that I said, maybe I can help you sign these customers at some point in time. And the list included Timberland, Under Armour, Ralph Lauren, probably some NFL properties, God knows who else. All these businesses that ultimately, many or most of them ended up on Demandware that I never got credit for from a commercial standpoint, but it's kind of besides the point. But I convinced him to hire me. We made my title up, and I remember the title was Director of Retail Technology Strategy. I'm the king of bizarre titles, right? But I was going to sit in that kind of Venn diagram space between product, marketing, and sales, and help. And that's, that was the thesis, right? The director of marketing at the time, her name was Kim. She had no idea I was being hired. I think Vicky Colby was probably the VP of services at the time. I don't think she had any idea I was being hired. Mac clearly had no idea I was being hired. But I think Tom might have known. I think I might have met with Tom Usual. And I came in and I was a bird from another. I was just the oddball, right? Here I am surrounded by all these people that knew each other from Allaire, whatever that was. All these people from Germany, from Intershop, that were transported to the US, right? Living as if they were working in Germany, but in this little US commune. I remember I was hired by ADP. I didn't even work for the company. I was hired by ADP. And Stefan, right? There was no onboarding plan. It was just here's Harvey, bye. And it was interesting, to say the least, right? It took Kim and I a while to figure out how to work well together. Vicky was so overwhelmed with the partner model that was premature. Ultimately, at the end of the day, right? Let's call it what it was.
Early. It was early.
Tactically, right? You guys were being asked to build solutions directly in Java without interacting with the core layers with no SOA architecture. And you had no training, no enablement, no reassurance, no embedded project, help. It was just here you go. And, try to navigate it. And then, from there, it obviously, went through some very, very interesting times. Obviously, the critical hires were Jeff Barnett came in, replacing Vicky. And, I don't know all the stories there. I'm sure that they both have interesting stories there. Jeff came in replacing Tom. Philip came in essence, replacing Vicky. And so Jeff and Philip had no idea who I was. They weren't a part of me onboarding. They didn't know what to do with me.
Right? That was probably
it was a summer. It was not that. It was summer of 2005.
Yeah, because I remember working with Philip. Yeah.
Yeah. And so they didn't know what to do with me. So I sat I'd come into Woburn. We were in Woburn at the time. I was in Stratham, New Hampshire, driving an hour and 10 minutes each way. And they would come in and do their thing. No one know what to do with me. I sat in my office, I used to joke. I went to the the end of the internet, and now I'm back because I don't know what else to do today. And really, it was the problems that happened at Gardeners that gave me an opportunity to step in, right? And it was, I think Marco was doing trying to do the training. And we were at the Pixel offices when I first met TJ and the Pixel team. And I saw Marco trying to do this training, but having no idea who Pixel was or no idea who Gardeners were. And I met Max, and Max was telling me all the problems and like his willingness to overcome all the problems and like just needed help. And really the word is needed an advocate for his voice. And that's really the role I ended up taking from that day forward was within Demandware, I'm going to be the advocate or the voice of the customer. And it's really interesting too, right? So when I worked at GSI, we never really realized early on that we were a software company, right? We thought we were a retailer and we built software to manage our retailer. And if you know, back in the day with GSI, we owned the inventory. We were the merchant of record. So like the software was a means of being a retailer. It wasn't the other way around. And it wasn't till I left and came to Demandware, I'm like, oh, GSI was really a software and services company, but it really didn't know that it was a software company probably, or the engineers probably thought they were a software company, but every other aspect of the company didn't realize it was a software company, nor did we have any idea what it would have meant to be a software company. So here I am now at a software company with all these people that know everything about being a software company, but no clue how to sell into retail or how to be a retailer. And you know, what's really interesting with the Demandware story is we thought of ourselves and we always thought of our ideal customer or ideal buyer as the merchant, not the IT organization. And when you're selling to a merchant, now you're a vendor, right? And the vendor relationship in retail as a buyer, like literally they have a term, right? Not procurement, they have buyers. And buyers, literally their entire living is predicated on buying stuff, right? So now you're trying to sell software to buyers. And it really ultimately was what, in my opinion, what made Demandware successful is its ability to recognize and react to this different sales cycle and selling to business users and selling to buyers and being empathetic and customer centric as a retail organization. You know, the shared success model, all these things we kind of created. Like there were no playbooks, there was just none of it. But Stefan's willingness to fund a non-software person to come into the organization with a stupid title, without any really clearly defined role, without any clearly defined boss, but recognizing the importance of customer advocacy early on within the cycle and software companies speaking retail, was really differentiated at the time. And, luckily the money didn't run out before the story could be told. Because ultimately, right, and as Rich knows, like that was ultimately the battle. Like we could have been so right, and it wouldn't have mattered if the money ran out before the story could be told. But we luckily didn't run out of money before the story could be told.
Yeah, I mean, I was drinking the Kool-Aid early, and I remember having I think the first time I met Philip was at Playboy when we were trying to do that deal, and it was a bit of because at that time you guys were software and services, and we were just trying to become partners, right? And so it was a big fight. He's like, there's no way that, Lions can do this implementation. They're not trained. They don't, and it was kind of true, but we were already in at Playboy, and Scott, who TJ knows, is a friend, and Scott's like, well, if Lions isn't doing it, then we're not doing the project. And so then it was kind of like, okay, we'll figure it out. And that was kind of how the early days were, but it was a fight. But I do think, I mean, and maybe you would agree or disagree, but I brought into that shared success model like this was ingenious, right? Because I just thought like you, and I'm saying global you, Demandware, I mean, you had an interest in making sure that customer was selling as much as they could because you were making part of that. And I thought that was brilliant, and people loved it. I mean, I was just talking recently with Frank about that, and they loved that model. Like you were invested in their success, right? And so you weren't charging them necessarily. I mean, of course, you charge them for certain services, but there was a part you were giving away for free, like your role or a customer success role, because you wanted them to sell a lot online because then you made more money. It was great.
Listen, there was a time when the retail practice, right, pre-Troy, was me, Claire Godzicki, and Sean White, right? And we were free,
Yeah.
right? And
No, that's
we'd
what I mean.
fly around the country
You were
and
doing the right thing. Yeah.
we were doing the right things for the right outcomes. And it was amazing, right? Like that team, like the three of us was awesome. And it was so cool. Just got through Christmas. I remember I bought a donkey and an elephant once and gave one to each of them, right? Because there was like the three incredibly different people who came from incredibly different backgrounds with strong retail DNA that came to work for a software company to help our clients succeed. And we were an entitlement. And what's really interesting, right? Like to this day, like one, it's probably why I was a really hard person to sell to, when I was at Crocs for a long time, because that was what I expected of my vendor partners. But it also helped shape like kind of what I'm trying to do with Red Van, right? Is reinstill that mindset, from a services side. A little harder on the services side. Our margins are a lot, as you guys know, the margins are a lot smaller and the business is a lot tighter to be able to do that, but than it was on the software side. But you've got to be there. You've got to be alongside the customer. And even the concept of retail practice or customer, like this all started before customer success was a thing, right? Because it started before SaaS was a thing. I mean, Demandware was one of the first SaaS companies. So the concept of customer success didn't exist. And we made the concept of retail practice up. We were very specific. We were going to create a practice that was focused on retail, but we were in a service. And I was very committed and had the support of, for a long time, not for forever, but for a long time, of Jeff and less so Philip. But Jeff, of like, guys, this is not a billable service. This is an entitlement. We got to give it. We got to be there, to really deliver that shared success model.
Well, it's the long play. I mean, without it, nobody knew how to get to their goals, right?
Well, the product was so freaking hard, right? Let's call it what it was.
And it still is, but I think the long play is to bring a little bit of that magic back in the agency model. I don't know if you've listened to the podcast. Rich and I talked about this. I don't remember. I kind of went off and waxed poetic on kind of what I think the future agencies need to be successful, and it has to be less, here's a service, here's an SOW, and more, here's a partnership, and here's an agreement, and I'm going to be here for you. It's funny because I get asked to contribute to all these absolutely foolish LinkedIn things about, your client relies on you for support, but there are no boundaries set. And, how do you work with a client that relies on you for support and set up clear boundaries? And there are like 35 answers. Anyone that hears this should go look for that in my feed. Every one of the answers was like the dumbest thing that ChatGPT you must have clear boundaries by setting clear boundaries, by making sure that there are times of day and methods of calling. And I'm like, guys, that's bullshit. If they're paying you and they're relying on you, your job is to be one less worry in their day. There are no boundaries. Okay. You crossed that boundary when you executed your SOW. And by the way, you probably had nothing to do with the SOW and the terms within it anyway. So now you have a baby that you have to raise, and you might have got a newborn. You might got a 5-year-old. You might have a PhD, right? We worked with clients that stressed us out so much, we could barely hang on with them while we were, supposedly mentoring them, right? So it's an interesting thing. I'm glad you're doing it, and I'm glad you're talking about it, because I think we've lost that actually over the last few years. I think coming out of COVID, a lot of good shit disappeared, and I do think the agency of the future has to be more partner and more long play. Personally, that's a dialogue really for another day. So you're on the agency side now, Harvey.
I am.
You're running an agency that, at one point was the belle of the ball in the Demandware ecosystem. They kicked the shit out of us. It took clients from us constantly. Went through some tough times. Had to look, because you were like we were a purist, right? Like how Rafter One still is able to stay a purist on the Commerce Cloud platform, to me is a very interesting thing when you're reading the tea leaves. But you not only had to like evolve your Demandware practice, but you had to kind of jump over to sort of a parallel universe. How has that been for you, sort of as a CEO and a business leader, kind of leading this group to, quite frankly, brand new hunting grounds. Everything about it is different. Talk a little bit about kind of what that's been, because you're still relatively new into the journey. And I know that you started it pretty, I want to say quietly, because there was a time when if you were doing what the three of us were doing on the Demandware platform, you weren't, it wouldn't, you weren't looked at kindly if you picked up another platform.
Yeah.
You kind of had to hedge your bets there. So talk a little bit about what that transition's like, because I don't think that story gets told enough.
So, when I joined Red Van, what was it, about a year and a half ago, I just had an opportunity to ask a lot of questions first, right? And really the two questions were, one, why don't we have a Shopify practice at that time? And two, why are these customers leaving us? And there were answers to the first question, why did we didn't have a Shopify practice, which were answered with statements. And what I had a willingness to do was to challenge the statements and try to get to facts, right? And probably the biggest statement that was made, and it might have been true leading up till middle of last year, where the platform isn't capable of doing the types of things that Red Van likes it to do or people pay us to do. And even if you could do it, the value of that work isn't as high as Red Van likes to get for the work we do, since we're all onshore and our cost structure is what it is.
Market pricing is
Right.
definitely different between the platforms.
And so I was able, even with the people answering the questions, I was able to work with the people who are answering the questions and try to get facts behind that. And there were facts brought up that, like, no, you can do some pretty cool shit on the platform. It's different, right? You're not deploying the code into the instance, right? You're creating apps. The only apps aren't just public apps. Like, you can create private apps that do unique things for unique customers. That's protected IP to your business. It's a different model, right? You got to monetize that, not just on the upfront, but on the managed services of that app going forward. And there are businesses that don't want to pay Jimmy's web shop $35, $50, $75, $125 an hour to do it live, right? To do it in production. That are looking for a little bit more, little mindfulness, a little SDLC, have some SOX compliance they need to get through, have some, audits they need to be, separation of duties they need to figure out, that are willing to pay upwards of $200 an hour or more for that expertise and capability. So once those statements were rebutted with facts, then we pivoted to why are we losing customers? And what we learned is we had customers that were rejecting decisions they had made 5-10 years earlier based on new market conditions. And what I mean by that is a less expensive, more capable platform that wasn't available when they made their decision, that was more appropriate for their RCG, resale to, RCG business, selling t-shirts, selling shoes, selling whatever, where they were sellers of merchandise, not software technology firms, not technology operators. They just wanted to sell and market. And they actually, when we asked them, they're like, well, we didn't want to leave Red Van, but we had to pivot our business to this less expensive, simpler way of operating. And you didn't have an offering. And in fact, not only did you have an offering, you kind of thumbed your nose up to it a little bit. And so they left. And those two things said, we got to deal with this, guys. Like, getting customers is really hard.
Question for you, Harvey.
Yeah, of course.
So you bring up a really interesting topic that I want to unpack a little bit, on this idea that they weren't leaving you. They didn't really want to leave you, but they didn't have an option. But they had probably been doing research and looking at alternatives long before you guys got notified, right? And you could kind of read the tea leaves. You're out of this decision. You're out of that meeting, things like that. Things get mentioned unknowingly. How was that for you and the team to hear? Was that a surprise for you guys to hear that, guys, this has nothing to do with you. This is about the long-term viability of the stack that we need to be successful. because that's a different story
So
that not a lot of people get to.
yeah,
How was the response to that?
so I don't think Red Van was in a great position to respond to that in the past because of our myopic focus on the technical nature of the work we do and our depth of our relationships with the technologists and not with the business people,
Yeah, but your
right?
Red Van was what percentage was technical? 98.
98%, right? I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, the vast majority of our business till 2, 3 years ago was staff aug, right? It was not even managed services. It was like, you're paying for this person. We're building a timesheet, right? And it's just an alternative to hiring,
I think the only
right?
non-technical person you had was a technical PM.
I mean, the most non-technical people we had were, in essence, the people that ran the PMO, right? Who had been in the space for a long time, right? You guys remember We Do Commerce,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right? So like Steve and Brendan are like related to and part of the We Do Commerce team, oddly. Like I had no idea, right? And so Brendan and I, Jeanette is his mom. Like think about that. Like my guy that runs ops for me, his mom was Jeanette at We Do Commerce.
Holy cow, for real?
Yeah.
That's first of all, there's a testament to how long we've been around.
Yeah. So
Too
it was
long.
really hard. So it was really, me coming in at the senior level of the organization and being able to, bring not a business acumen. Obviously, Mark and Juan have great business acumen. They built this incredible business, right? But an empathetic view of the merchant, right? That merchant mindset and how hard their job had become, not to like push content to the website, not to create a promotion, not to optimize for SEO, but like to find another dollar to compete on the marketplace for share of voice. And so, Shopify in essence has given merchants an opportunity to free up a bunch of cash to refocus it in that area of their business. And maybe they gave up, could be argued that you gave up some control, you gave up some capability, right? But who cares? Like it's non-differentiating control for, very, very, very large quantities of merchants.
You're
Maybe
the
not the
very
most biggest, but large quantities of them doing good business.
you said a term that I haven't heard anybody say before, and you hit the nail on the head. It's non-differentiating loss of control. Like there are things you can't do there that you could do on other platforms, but we have all matured so much, they're no longer the value add that they were.
Well, and it's gotten the opposite, right? It went from non-differentiating to actually positive differentiating. And if you look at, Shop Pay and the Shopify checkout, for the vast majority, right? Not dollar wise, but merchant count, there is tremendous benefit to that experience, right? Now, there is probably a threshold, right? Because merchants, I'll give you a great example. I made a holiday purchase on a Shopify merchant this summer for my own self, right? It was very clearly a Shopify transaction. Shopify clearly was involved in my mental state related to that transaction. That merchant ghosted me for 10 days, right? I had no idea if my order was shipping. It was incredibly unique merchandise, right? And in many ways, there was a negative halo effect to Shopify for me for that transaction because that merchant ghosted me. They finally shipped it, right? But there's association to the broader Shopify network, which is very different, right? Had that merchant been on Salesforce, right? Like I would have had no clue they were on Salesforce if I was anyone else, right? It wouldn't look, even if they were on Autobahn or whatever accelerator or storefront, like there's not that association. So there is some, it'll be interesting to see how it evolves over time. But the bottom line is I bought from that merchant specifically because they were on the Shopify platform. I could do Shop Pay. I had to press no buttons. I just had to say yes on my phone, and it was super frictionless checkout, And that experience is just, it's unlocking for a business who can't afford it on their own, honestly, right? So it's almost gotten to a benefit for a lot of merchants too.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the challenges we've run into in the enterprise market, right, which is probably going to be weird coming from an enterprise guy, is that having the power to do everything is probably the most incredibly difficult thing to control for any organization, whether you're an SI or you're a brand or you're a platform in the middle of it all. And somebody asked me, because I ran a Shopify store for a buddy who has an American-made apparel brand, and
I'm
I did it
familiar
for
with
about
him,
a
if you
year to
remember.
help. What's that?
If you're familiar, I'm familiar with that guy.
Yes. Yeah. Well, he just came back to me and
Okay.
is now back again looking for some guidance. But people always ask me, and they were like, well, what do you, because I love the platform. I never talked about it openly. And I said, it's so freeing. They're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, there's so much shit I can't do that the fact that I don't even have to think about it anymore is really amazing. Right. And there's so many things that I can do, and they're so powerful that you only have so many cycles in the day to use your brain. So when there's 1,000 things to fuck with, or there's 36 things to fuck with, the 36 is, to somebody with my level, that's a very invigorating and kind of energizing experience. So for me, it was freeing when I worked on the platform. I just, there's just so much shit you don't have to worry about.
So there are two kind of Harveyisms, I guess you call them, or I'll call them for lack of anything else, that came out in those formative years, right? From 2006 to 2009, that I took to a lot of different businesses. And it was kind of the result of selling into Timberland and selling into Troy, right? So at the end of the day, like the sales process of Demandware into Timberland, which was a GSI merchant, that had a customizable thing, the build your own boot thing, built by Fluid, right? Another agency, right? For another platform. And the work we did to both validate to ourselves that we could do it, but also validate to Troy and that Demandware was a viable option for him outside of GSI, was this concept of with control comes responsibility, right? And during COVID, this concept just went out the door, right? Demandware gave our merchants so much control that this like huge responsibility was unavoidable to come with it, like unavoidable, right? And at the time, way back in the day, like your alternatives were even more responsibility, like an ATG or a hybrid or a market live, right? Which is like, yeah, you're just paying somebody else to have 100% of it all the time, on an individualized basis. And it was like a light bulb went off in Troy's mind when he saw like this balance, like, oh, I get all this control, but I actually have all this responsibility now that I have to plan for. And I can plan for it through services, through partnerships, through agencies, or I can hire for it. And he was lucky enough to have a web developer. Her name is Katie. I think she worked for you, TJ, at a point in time. Katie, her maiden name was Lyman. I don't know what her married name is now, who also understood it. But it became this model of, yes, you can have this tremendous control, built these totally customized experiences, but you better be prepared for the responsibility. And then the other one was there's no silver bullet. And the silver bullet had to do with solving a problem, right? There is no easy button, right? If all you want is the easy button, then you're going to be dissatisfied. You're going to find frustration. So the more upfront, the more proactive, the more collaborative we were around these two concepts, the more successful we are. And at the end of the day, Burton Snowboards, Columbia Sportswear, Crocs, and Deckers are these like marquee businesses that understood what they were getting into, had the scale to resource and plan for it, had either agency partners or internal teams or hybrid. I think Columbia was, somebody else has been on the pod, right? Through, I don't know, I forget at Deckers who we had, but anyway, besides the point, those two things became so critical. And what Shopify has really done at the enterprise space is they've changed the game. And they've introduced an easy button. They've introduced a different paradigm around control and responsibility that have truly changed the game and given an alternative where you can give up some control, but gain so much more ease of use. And it's resonating every single day, right? And it's really, really been interesting to watch. As you alluded to earlier, like for us, we were very slow and deliberate in building a Shopify practice. We didn't want to announce anything till we already had a customer live. We didn't want to, in essence, rate a success that hadn't yet happened. And it was happening when there were larger firms than us that were more powerful, more, that were much more interested in, it was a cost benefit, right? It was so important to Shopify to get the announcement, and it was so important for the agency to show diversity that the actual proof text was secondary. So we did the opposite, right? And we've crawled, walk, run. We've launched our first Shopify customer. We've gotten our Shopify certification. We then launched a page on our website that said Shopify. And what's really starting to be interesting in the Shopify space is we're starting to talk to prospects and engage where the problems they're trying to solve are all the problems we've solved for before through custom cartridges and custom integrations and custom business flows. What's different is it's just on a different platform. And they're selling to all these Shopify agencies who have installed public apps or built a one-off private app, at no scale, but have no idea how to do source code management, know how to do change control, know how to do separation of duties, right? And Shopify is now in an ecosystem where those checkboxes are maybe more important. They're not even more important. They're gateways. If you can't do those things, then whatever skill you have on the back end is irrelevant. You've got to be able to prove these values. And, that's where I think Red Van's has great upside. And then we're also continuing to see, strength in the Salesforce industry related to commerce, but in unique areas, right? Really entrenched Salesforce businesses that haven't embraced commerce that are just getting into it. For us, it's the EDU space has been really interesting, but there are others. And this is not an either or. This is not a winner take all. This is a leveling of a playing field with two dominant players with great products that ultimately serve different business purposes. And what excites me is the best businesses are ones that are going to go through a process of understanding what their business values and processes and goals and objectives are and aligning to a product strategy that better aligns to that versus just purely looking at them and competing on price. I think I answered the question, didn't answer, but
No, great.
No, that's legit. And I mean, there's got to be some politicking in there, That's the reality of it. I mean, there's room for everybody. I think I've said it before. There's a lot of deer in them woods, and
Otherwise, TJ and I wouldn't be friends. I mean, come on.
well,
We always felt there was plenty of room out there.
Yeah, and there still is. And I think what's going to be interesting as things mature is there aren't a lot of enterprise people entering at scale that ecosystem yet, right? You're still talking largely dominated by shops that are, under 20 people, right? And, that's the 2025 version of the WooCommerce and the WordPress agency, right? So it is. I think there's a lot of room in the middle to go in and capture that market. I think you can be the greatest of the smalls, which is kind of where we lived before you go be the smallest of the bigs, right? And Rich, you kind of made that jump. You were what we called the biggest of the smalls, and then you became the smallest of the bigs, right? When you went through CAP. But I mean, that division now is what, 1,800 people? I mean, that's massive.
Jeez.
Truth be told, I don't know if I'm talking out of school on this, but IPG came in and asked me about what I thought. Actually, a lot of people come to me and ask me, including private equity, specifically the private equity that is involved in probably the most notable roll up going on right now in the Shopify space. And I gave them a whole, my perspective. This was years ago, by the way, not a recent thing. And I wrote up a whole manifest about here's what I think's going on, here's the gap, here's the opportunity, here's what I think is important, here's what I think isn't important. And if I were you, or if you asked me what I would want to do with the next 5 years of my life, I laid out this whole plan. And I was like, thanks, this is really amazing and insightful. I'm going to give this to this other person who, to the best of my knowledge, has done nothing with it since then. But I still think there's a big window. I think we're still very early in the cycle.
Well, yeah, I think there was so much momentum coming out of COVID, right? And you guys know, right? It's the way the valuations worked and decision-making and stupid money and how things rolled up. And then it dropped so quickly. And then we had so much political turmoil and uncertainty in the market. And then Shopify came out with the enterprise strategy, and in many ways, I don't want to say cart before the horse, but the amount of earned media was far greater than the reality behind it.
Correct.
Right? Because we know enterprise cycles take a long time. And everybody and their mother is finding out, oh, this enterprise stuff is more than saying we're an enterprise. It's you got to be an 18-month sales cycles. You've got to go through procurement. You've got to get stakeholders at the board. Like the board is now involved in this decision versus somebody with a credit card, right? Like,
well,
so the time it's going to happen. It's just all taking longer than the earned media would have suggested it all take coming out of COVID.
It's taking longer for the piece everybody's looking at. The reality is that the enterprise play is a long play because there are 36 pieces on the board and your transaction engine is just one of them. And, people have to take a longer lens look at what they're doing right now. And, this is something we've talked about for years, which is that, we still have content issues out there, right? We still have system of record issues out there. We still have customer record issues out there. We still have major WMS and fulfillment and visibility and customer service issues out there. Right. And, that's why I kind of like the spirit of what Mark talks about, because it's this sort of composable concept. But I think people misunderstand because we're all kind of so entrenched in our thing that, there's a lot of other pieces that need to happen before probably the transaction engine gets switched out, especially not knowing where everybody is in their license cycle. I don't think a lot of people understand licensing and that some folks sign 1, 2, 3, 5, and 10-year terms, right? And you just never know where they're going to come up. I think another really interesting opportunity, just to go back to the simplicity, is that I think that Shopify's had an opportunity to build a new enterprise model after looking at all the other enterprise models and seeing that there's a different and more modern way to do it, right? It's modern architecture and at its best and standing on the shoulder of giants. You have to admit that they're learning from everybody else, which, by the way, not a knock, that's evolution. I think the other interesting opportunity is we have a whole new generation of leaders and merchandisers and marketers in the brands now that weren't there 10 years ago, right? Their needs are different. Their wants are different. The things that they want to do, the things that they don't want to do. What are we calling the technical debt that doesn't live in IT? What do we call the technical debt that lives in the business, right?
Yeah.
We don't even know what to call that. In this move for brands to hire, have you seen a move for customers to start bringing people internal and rely less on partners and more on bringing full-time staff in and things like that? That's something we saw a pretty big groundswell on coming out of.
So there's definitely, it's a bifurcation, right? Obviously on the Shopify stack, the technical team you need in-house is much, I don't want to say lower, much simpler than when you're on a different side.
I'm more thinking on the business side.
But on the business side, people are it's just the scrutiny on every dollar in SG&A is increasing, right? People's sophistication around managing their P&Ls, the scrutiny around add back versus CapEx, like these things are so critically important to the viability of businesses that play in those P&Ls. And that's where I think one of the challenges some of the smaller agencies has as they go up market and as they play in enterprises, the lack of simplicity on the buying decision. It's not just about you and your bill, but it's like how your bill is coded to the P&L and where that goes in the add back and what accounting, or SOX compliance team or audit happens and how that works. I mean, these things are all just so critically important, but there's definitely, every business and their mother is trying to free up cash to spend on media generating, eyeball generating traffic, right? On media, either earned media or, non-earned media, paid media, whatever you want to call it, right? I mean, it's all paid media at some point in time, even earned media is paid media at this point in time. And a developer, right, sitting on that P&L as SG&A for $150,000 or $175,000 fully burdened, right, is really hard to justify recurringly. So, it puts a lot of constraint. And generally, right, the way you think about it is you've got a director of engineering or, a technical lead and a CDO or a VP of eCommerce, right? And you've got this business person generally, right, questioning the value of the technical resource. So there's already a disadvantage to the technical team, right? Because what actually is interesting is maybe versus 10 years ago, is that VP of e-commerce, the P&L holder, is becoming more technologically aware, right? And I think this is happening all over, right? CEOs who don't need or don't defer 100% of technology decision-making to their CIO anymore. Like, that doesn't happen anymore, right? The best CEOs, the most aware CEOs, the most innovative businesses have pretty technical senior leadership in more than one role. And so it's just putting a lot more scrutiny and making decision-making. Like, you got to be productive. You're productive, you get all the value you want, right? You're insulated because of a lack of knowledge or historical like gaps in technical acumen. Like, that's what doesn't flow anymore.
Yeah.
Let me pivot on you for a second, just
Yeah,
because
please.
you mentioned CEOs. How has it been, and being a CEO? I mean, because I don't think people understand it until they do it. I mean, I don't mean that negatively, right? But I think it's, there's a lot of pressure.
So story time.
Right?
So 2 years ago, just about 2 years ago, when I decided to walk away from my previous job, right? I was a CDO at a retailer. It was, in many ways a dream job if you look at me from the outside and think about my career and my passions. I stepped away, and partly because I kind of had no interest in being a CEO, right? And there was a lot of other mitigating factors, but I stepped away from that role, and one of the variables in my head was like, I really don't want to be the CEO. Like, I just don't want that responsibility. Like, I don't think I thrive in there. And I was out of work for about 3 months. And during that 3-month sabbatical, or whatever you want to call it, right? Self-chosen, isolation. What I realized is it wasn't that I didn't want to be a CEO and take that responsibility and have that accountability. What I realized is how important the relationship between decision makers and their enablers is. And in business, right, that's usually at the CEO, it's the board, right? And what I found at Red Van, not looking for it, is and unlike your businesses, right? I mean, Rich, you had a couple of partners, but it was very much Rich's business. TJ, you had, pretty equal, but it was a small group, right? Red Van, we got 5.
Just 2 of us.
Right? I got 5.
Yeah.
Right?
A
And
lot.
the 3 of them I've known for a very long period of time. One of them directly worked for me. One of them I hired to work for me as a contractor and had provided services to before that. And the other I'd worked alongside of delivering services for. And through those relationships historically, there was a degree of trust that became like, it transcended like business. It was like, I'm not expecting you to be right. I'm expecting to trust you. And what I mean, like, you're going to make wrong decisions, but I'm going to trust that you tried to make the right decision. And I'm going to trust that as a result of making the wrong decision, you're going to be able to pivot and learn. And what I found at Red Van is a situation where I was excited to become the CEO, have that degree of accountability, because there was this mutual trust between the bidirectional trust that I had never felt before in a relationship, in a working relationship. I had parts of it, like I had tried to instill it in my teams, but I always like had it differently where I reported to, and it worked to a certain degree, but it eventually, expired. But here, like I trust them to trust me, and they trust me to trust them. And in the year I've been the CEO, I have made hard decisions.
Yeah, for sure.
Right? Really hard decisions.
The hardest in a long time.
Right?
Yeah, the hardest. Yeah.
Like crazy hard decisions that were right, but they were hard. But I trusted, there's just this trust that allowed me to do it. And the other part of it is that what I've been able to bring maybe to the role is this perspective of, yes, one-to-one relationships are really important, but the one-to-many relationship thing that the CEO ultimately has to think about that is like faceless has to be more important. And
Well,
I think
that's a culture, right? I mean, I don't think people talk about culture a lot. I mean, I talk about culture a lot, but what you're saying, which is, I think, amazing, like trust then permeates your culture. right? Like you're talking about trust, but that then permeates the culture, and that's why people stay, and that's why people work for you.
It's also why people, what I'm learning is also why people leave.
Correct.
Yeah.
And
You're
that's,
right.
I don't want to send callous or, you know, or anything, but it's also important, right? Like you use the word culture, like, when I took the role, I have leadership mentoring that's involved in the leadership team at Red Van. And I have a coach, if you will, that I've relied on, someone I met previously to joining Red Van. And I didn't appreciate the cultural impact of the changes that Red Van was going to go through over the year and a half, right? Not just the Shopify practice, not just the contraction to fit the market sizes we've had to go through, but just decision making, right? The difference between a CEO making decisions and partners / owners making decisions. Um, and they knew very early on that the cultural shift was going to be material and it's going to be impactful and it's going to be shocking. But it was like, late last year, or maybe 3/4 of the way through last year, I really started to appreciate the amount of change culture that we're going through without losing our soul, without losing the core of who we are. For us, we use this hashtag not a cult, right? Which it's more about the individual personalities of people, right? And showing up, it's kind of ironic, right? You guys know I worked at Crocs for a long time, like the come as you are, like come as we are. We are individuals,
I
but
still have my Demandware Crocs, by the way.
you might need to wear those in June. The entity of Red Van has to be as important, if not more important, to the individual, because it won't survive and it won't thrive. Like if we only are the individuals, eventually it all fades out. But if there's this bigger entity of we're all in service to each other, and each other has manifested itself as Red Van, then really good things can happen. And it's starting to happen. It also is interesting, and I mentioned it earlier, right? Like the heritage and DNA of Red Van, a lot of it has to do with staff aug. And if you know a lot about the staff aug business, right, it's mercenary business, it's individual contributors, it's like this person, that person. The value is in the individual person and their individual hours, not the greater good, the greater entity, the greater relationships, and I don't want to say the Borg, but like the group that we bring. We are much more powerful when we show up as Red Van versus we show up as whatever is in the brain of the individual contributor, who's the only resource and access the client ever has access to, because that's what they paid for. If they have access to everything Red Van brings at every point in time, it's much more valuable. And that's a change and a transition and a shift. That's impactful, but it's the right one to go through.
I
I
think
think
that's cool.
every business is going to struggle with that comment and that statement that you just said, which is, how do I make all of us visible and over the one of us?
And it comes back to what were talking about earlier, I think, Harvey, like, and everyone says it, but living it and building a business around it is very difficult, like putting the customer first. And you're trying to, like you were just weighing off the business that's Red Van and the individual, and how do you manage that while focusing first on doing the right thing for the customer, right? And I
Yeah.
think that, gosh, people say it, but it's hard. And you have such a great background, because Demandware did it, then you were on the brand side. And I think, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to keep that maniacal focus, I guess, on what are we doing for our customer and what are we doing right.
Yeah. The customer centricity is a term we've been using a lot here recently, but I've tried to like not just say it's about the customer first, right? Because it sets up a hierarchy that I think can be challenging, right? Especially based on some of the stuff you were mentioning around like terms of the contracts and how you can contact us and all that stuff. But it's the concept of value creation, right? The value we create for our customers has to be more than what they pay us. And it has to be materially more by like magnitudes of 10 for it to continue. And the
Well,
more
and I think
people
that's
in
what
our
you and I have been talking about. I think there's room for, someone like a Red Van to be disruptive in that middle space.
Well, the question is, well, we won't get into it today because it's all going to be secret sauce stuff. I think it's another dialogue on it. Maybe it's the no show thing, Rich, where we talk about that. But there's so many tools that go underutilized to realize what Harvey's kind of getting at, right? How do you provide this value beyond the individual, but how do you allow the individual to provide that value on behalf of the enterprise as well, right? That's actually where the magic is at, is how do I make this person feel like 100, and how do I make this knowledge feel cumulative and all that, and there's a whole other dialogue there, because that's a whole strategy into itself. And I still think Salesforce used to call me all the time and ask me how I would improve these different things. They don't do that anymore because I was too honest.
They invite me, that's for sure.
But my answer was always like, if you just used your own shit on yourselves, you might get there. Well, Harvey, it's funny the invite me thing. I mean, are you still on the partner advisory board for?
I am. It's one of the things that brings me to New York for NRF.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be at NRF. Are you going to be there?
Yeah, I'll be there too. Oh, cool.
Right. Dylan and I are both staying in the same hotel, so that's going to be a disaster. But I'm bringing Jackson with me, Rich. So
that's cool.
My 19-year-old. But my point behind that was that, are you guys aware that Affronti is gone now? He's been gone for
saw that announcement.
He hasn't announced where he's going yet. Although I know where he's going. I don't believe it's public, but I think Alex is the interim GM, is my understanding.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they say, at the PAB in a couple of weeks, right? Until then, it's just all various conversation points.
I should ask for like a guest in, like Rich and I should go
as I would love to be a guest.
Or Rich, if you and I were like,
I'll send you the time and location of the cocktail dinner the night before, because it's in a public restaurant.
It is. Why don't you do that? And Rich
and
I will
just show up at the bar. That would be
what do they call that? Emeritus?
Emeritus, yeah, emeritus. I mean, we're definitely PAB emeritus. I mean, come on, we should get invited. Alumni.
I threatened to quit. You guys will love that. I'm like, why am I here? Like, this is really matter. And someone had said, please don't quit.
Well, it's one big PAB now. It's B2B, B2C, OMS.
It's two PABs,
DTC.
But pretty much everything is done together. And the reality is,
that's one PAB.
If you think about it, right, like the way it works is they're selling D2C commerce.
Are the ISVs separate? Commerce. ISVs are separate though, right?
Hold on. I want him to finish this. Right. Go ahead, Harvey.
So Salesforce is selling D2C commerce,
which is
alongside B2B commerce, which is now the same platform.
Right.
And that's D2C commerce
on B2B.
To sell and service D2C commerce, you need all the B2C commerce knowledge, expertise, experience.
All the core stuff. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's this like really interesting amalgamation. We have a prospect that we're selling to right now, and it's a B2B deal, right? Which is ultimately commerce on core, which is ultimately D2C. And the buyer is like concerned about, Red Van's expertise in the Salesforce B2B platform. I'm like, well, no one really has tremendously deep experience on the commerce engine on core because they keep rewriting it. Right. So anyone that says they've done like 37 projects on B2B is really talking about a product they don't even support anymore that they acquired and they sunsetted. So
absolutely.
No. They did 36 projects on 27 revisions.
So it's really interesting. We have another prospect that's really interesting, and they're in an interesting space where they actually want to talk to us before they talk to Salesforce, who they're currently a customer of us, so they can get our guidance and recommendation on what licenses they actually need to buy to do their job.
I love that.
Versus bring us in after Salesforce has sold the licenses. And then we have to like reconcile those licenses versus what actually they want to do.
Yeah.
And that interesting challenge. Like, you never had this problem because we had one license, right? Like,
correct. But you get to, it's a weird thing. Like, dude, I've been in deals where it's like they bought 9 things. I'm like, you only need 2. They're like, yeah, but they gave us a good deal. I'm like, no.
We'll never use it, but it's a good deal. Yeah.
And that was a shit show. Actually, Zengel inherited that after we bit a bit away from it. But no, I love Alex. I always have. I think he's a good dude. I still have faith. I still have faith in those guys on that platform. I want to know who they're going to put in charge of commerce, right? Like, if they don't hire Rich and I, at least for the first year.
Someone sent me the job description and said, hey, you want to apply? I go, that would be kind of funny.
Is there actually a rec open
Yeah,
for?
there was. I literally got a job. Literally got a job posting. I think it was for an SVP of commerce.
Oh, I'm gonna have to find that. Fucking send that
I'll
to me.
forward you. As I said, someone at another agency had actually sent it to me.
I think we should both apply, TJ, as fractional. So
Dude,
we'll do it like a two-headed monster. I think it would be awesome. Come on.
My only criticism is that there isn't anybody in charge of commerce that knows commerce. So I just think that that's like a really important. I think that's a really important skill to have. I mean, call me crazy, but I think you can't just look good on stage and be able to read a teleprompter. I mean, you should know something about commerce because that's the piece that hasn't been unlocked yet. And I don't think commerce is dead on the platform. I don't think commerce is dead in that enterprise. I just think they have to find somebody that can actually do that. I won't shave or cut my hair, but I look good in a button up, and I can definitely get 1,000 people in a room to listen to me. That's not an issue. Well, Harvey, I appreciate all that, dude. I feel like we could do probably a 4 hour. We could do a Rogan style 3 or 4 hour episode here.
So leading up to today, I'm like, I wonder where this is going to go. Is it going to be like my story? Is it going to be?
We never know. Yeah,
like
we
the
never
first
know.
year of Demandware? Is it going to be like my role at Red Van? Like, there's like so many places it could go that I think is kind of interesting. So this has definitely been fun, but clearly just a fraction of the stories we could tell each other. I mean, I haven't even, I got to say it, right? I got to throw it in there.
We're not hanging up. You get to ask us some questions. We're not done.
So I guess I'll pivot, right? So to Rich, right?
Well, no, hold on. No, you got no question yet. Do you realize that?
Then I'm going to say, like,
we have 60 years of Demandware experience. 60 years on the platform, right?
And just 3 of us.
And there is just 3 of us. That's alarming. Crazy. But go ahead, Harvey. Sorry about that.
So we talked about Playboy a little bit, Rich, which is a really funny story. It's got some funny stories about the sales cycle there and building the demo, as you can imagine.
Yes.
Olivier had some fun with that one. So I don't know who did it. I mean, it was Olivier did the demo. I remember Adam was intimately involved. Like, it was one of his first deals that he got really being involved in. But it came on the heels of Fredericks of Hollywood, right? Like that was like the one. And one of my first interaction with Lions Consulting Group was actually through Fredericks when they called me in to help, and they introduced the concept of spaghetti code. I had never heard this term before. Like, we've all used this term how many times since?
Oh, for sure.
Right? But I remember Fredericks of Hollywood going out to their offices and like just go back to we had Fredericks of Hollywood, we had Playboy, and we were actively selling Fig Leaves, which was a lingerie company out of the UK. And there's another one, right, that we were in that business having some success. And we started talking about the adult entertainment industry and how innovative they are and how well they early adopters of technology.
They
and
are.
We could pivot there, right? We could pivot there and open up this sell thing. And again, you go to like business leadership and boards and CEOs and decision making and short-term versus long-term thinking. And again, like, we could have done it and chased the dollar like the SMB business, but we got to draw our line somewhere. And Playboy was that line we drew in the sand, right, around that space. But then, like, what happened afterward with micropayments and all kinds of stuff that industry can drive innovation on.
I mean, and the Playboy site was more of a lingerie site. I mean,
it was lingerie.
It wasn't the porn site.
Toys and fun, right?
It was the Shop the Bunny. They thought they were gonna, kind of take on.
But you had like the little market. You had Playboy. You had Fredericks of Hollywood, right?
We did.
Little market going there.
All for the articles. The story as old as time itself.
Exactly.
It's so funny because you talked about gardeners and dude, looking back, like Wayne and Max, and like we've lost like legit legends in our industry, and there's more than that, right? And those are just
in the Demandware ecosystem alone, right? So obviously Wayne and Max were big ones. I lost as well Keith Baltus, who was at Crocs and went to TaylorMade, was at PopSocket.
I didn't know Keith. I knew Keith at TaylorMade. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I'm pretty close with Keith. Trish Weishar, who worked for me at GSI way back in the day. And she ended up getting into the Demandware space, worked for a couple of different Demandware businesses. She went in for a routine procedure and tragically passed away. This part of the reason that was probably the most impactful thing in my personal life as to why I stepped away from my last job, was having lost these people in a relatively short period of time, and just like trying to figure out, like, why am I doing, why am I working? Right. And, I'm at a stage in life where I didn't need to work tomorrow, right, to pay the bills. I needed to work like 100 days from now, but tomorrow I didn't need to work.
It's interesting.
And that was like, in stepping away, I really started to understand this concept of trust and how critical these relationships are. And when you are afforded the opportunity to be a little bit more choosy, right, or purposeful in your pursuit, like, it's important to do it. And, I'm also at the stage now where what I do is really impactful to my kids at 19 and 21, trying to figure out what they want to do. Being somewhat of a sage, right? Like, I want to do the right things and lead the right life. And all of these accumulating losses, like, really did affect me. And what's really interesting too, because I lost my mom when I was 19. So I had lost, like, really early on, but what I've learned in the last 18 months is how numb that made me over the course of my career to loss. Like, I lost my mom at 19. F you lost. It created this numbness in me, that a sensitivity that I'm trying to gain back, is how precious life is, and how,
I love that.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I share some parallels there as far as my brother and COVID, and that did have an effect on me. Those were like, I have 3 other brothers and sisters. My little brother was like, that was my boy. I like give him my truck when he turned 40, and your youngest brother is like your firstborn. I think I actually wrote about that on LinkedIn one time. So, when you lose the baby, you lose your first child, because it's the person I experimented on. He's the kid that I learned how to pile drive into the couch, and found out where all the 2x4s were. Don't hit your brother in the head. He gets headaches.
Yeah.
Listen, he gets headaches because he drinks his hot cocoa too fast and throws up.
I'll also put a plug. I mean, it's also part of why I've taken somewhat of a, with your guys, like, I want to say push too, right? This Demandware reunion in June, right? Like this community means the world to me. And I really felt compelled to make sure not only that something happened celebrating, the launch of Zabars in February of 2005, right, as the first site that launched, but to bring all these people back, or in, like I said, Paul and in his role, right? You guys in your advisory roles, those, hopefully get Olivier to fly out from whatever sailboat he's on somewhere doing demos for Salesforce still, and just marvel at the people and the relationships that we've created. And it's super cool. Like, it's really cool. And then the amount of financial support that the event's been able to get from, people who have gotten great privilege from the success, to make it so that we can invite everyone and put this party on, is going to be super cool as well.
So I still owe a pledge. I talked with Rich about it. So, Rich, what was your pledge, Rich? Can we?
No, you don't have to say.
No, my pledge is the same as your pledge, so that's I told Harvey, like, I'll get TJ to match my pledge.
Well, hold on, then put it in the chat, because I don't remember what you told me.
I don't remember either, but Harvey,
I have it on a spreadsheet. I'll remind you guys.
Send it back and double it, Harvey, and then we'll be in.
Yes,
invoices are going out in a couple of weeks.
I guess put me down for Riches. I guess I'm going to donate 1 Rolex too.
But here's I didn't know, right? So we talk about this stuff. So I connected back with Michael Skoke just the other day. I was going out playing 18 with my son, and he and I connected, and I hadn't talked to him in a while, and I had no idea he's going through some challenging medical stuff that I didn't know about. So again, the putting this reunion together got me to reconnect with someone who was incredibly influential in what I've been able to be a part of over the years. He's been incredibly supportive of me, and to know what he's going through, and just connect with him. And it's not so different than what some of the stuff my mom went through. And it was really cool. It was really cool.
That's amazing. And I think, we're talking about a few hundred of us are going to gather, right?
So the venue that will hold 500 people, I'll get all this stuff out there, right? Where you've got a way, and I've shared it, right, of trying to do invites. It's going to be +1. So everyone that gets invited gets to bring a +1, because families were such a part of making
absolutely
Demandware happen.
I'll call my ex-wife, see if she wants to come.
And so it's going to be +1. And so obviously people that were employees W-2 employees of Demandware before the acquisition are immediately invited, and then original customers of Demandware and original partners of Demandware will have invites as well, as long as they've subscribed to be invited. And then once we go through that, if we've got space left, then we'll get into the the post-acquisition ecosystem, which explodes the number
It
of
does.
people.
It does. Depending on whether he makes the cut, Dylan one or my wife will be Dylan Ronnie or my wife will be my plus one. So we'll walk
Yeah, I
into
listened
it.
to listen to Dylan's
Dylan
episode
will
the other
make
day.
the cut. Come
So
on.
I listened to Dylan's episode, and technically he won't, right? Unless we
Correct.
don't get it.
Unless I bring him. Yeah.
So Dylan, like, this just blew my mind, right? If you think about the influence Dylan had and the name he made for himself and the impact Phenom had, it didn't even start till I was gone.
I mean, it blew up in like 3 years. Like, it was crazy.
I remember when I first heard of Phenom, which was, I think, when Jenna went to the sneaker company.
Jenna Gwynn or Jenna Posner?
Jenna Posner went to the sneaker company, right? Who's another one, like, came out of the woodwork, right? Like in like a rocket ship. And she selected an agency for her project, and I was at Crocs at the time, I think, or it might have been at Christie, I don't remember. And I was like, who? What?
Yeah, you were at Christie. Yeah. Because she was looking at, we talked to her, and then she was looking at Astound as well.
Yeah. Well, because we were all looking, right? I was at Christie, I was looking at you, I was looking at all these people, right? And it was like, oh, you had the decency to tell me, dude, I can't take this project on. There's no way I meet your timeline, right?
I remember that. Honest. I was, dude. I literally called you, and you're like, fuck, I so appreciate it. I was like,
I think Astound, quoted me like, over $1 million, right? And then, Red Band was like, well, if you do X, Y, and Z, we can figure this out. And we did it with Red Band.
No, I think it's awesome. And so we'll see. We'll see what happens when the day comes. I'm psyched you're putting it together. The amount of messages I get hey, have you heard about this thing? I'm going to send you a link to a form. I'm like, I think I'm good, buddy. It's going to be all right. I'll be fine. Like, you're going to go back in history. Harvey, we have a little bit of time left, unless you have to run. Do you want to ask us any questions? I mean, I know when we first of all, we've been talking about doing this since February of last year. You actually came up with the idea of, let's just do an episode where you actually ask us questions. So maybe we
could do another one. Yeah, we could pivot into a whole episode.
Yeah, you've done that a little bit, but I mean, I'm going to start with Rich, because like I've just spent less time with Rich over the course of time, right? No, and I have with TJ almost just because of age, adjacency, right? I mean, TJ, you and I were physically close, and at one point in time, all truth to be told, right? I tried to get a job with you and run your Demandware practice, but that was before you paid people well.
I never tell that story.
But I mean, I'm really curious, right? Like, I know TJ's perspective on when it was bad, but I don't know Rich's perspective, right? So I said it earlier. So I flew out to Fragments of Hollywood. They were pissed as shit, right? They had this spaghetti code that wasn't working. They wanted to throw Lions Consulting Group under the bus. Like, they didn't know what the fuck they were doing. I'm sitting there trying to manage this. Like, how did you balance the blame game? How did you stay so neutral or so positive, even positive, when people just wanted to blame someone?
I mean, it's
fucking amazing
question. Yeah, that's a great question. This is going to be a multiple answer, right? Because I think we touch culture a little bit, right? And I think we tried to say and I'm using a global we, right? Lions Consulting Group. Like, I tried to instill this, learning culture, that we're always going to learn and grow, and we're always going to get better. But we also talked about, putting the customer first, but also this concept that the customer is always right, even when they're not. And I know that's kind of, both sides of the coin, but, because I would talk to, consultants and people, and like, listen, the customer's always right, even when they're not, because that's their perception. And their perception is their reality. And yes, we could fight them, and we have an SOW, and the SOW defines terms, and we could go back and say, okay, no, look at the SOW. And it was hard think about it from a developer perspective. A developer's doing their job, and they do exactly what is in an SOW, and they do what they're supposed to do. And then a customer comes back and says, this is shit, and it's not right. And my developer is saying, that's not true, and they're defending their code, right? So you can imagine the conflict there. And so, we came up over time, this didn't happen immediately, but over time we budgeted for accommodations. And that was kind of unheard of, at least back then. And the joke I always made was, Accenture budgets for lawsuits and we budget for accommodations. And that was kind of what we said, right? I kind of was trying to there is this rational notion of fairness. So if go to a customer and they're upset and they're going to, say, you guys messed this up and you need to fix it, can we have a rational discussion on what do you think is fair? So it's not a win-lose conversation, like it's a win-win conversation. So me, CEO of the company, name on the wall, what do you think is fair? Are we splitting this? Is it 60-40? Are you saying you want us to take full responsibility? But let's have a rational conversation. And I think that led us over the years to stay very rational with those conversations and some crazy situations and stories that Harvey, maybe you don't know, TJ's heard them before. There was one time we were probably, golly, $1 million into an implementation and we couldn't get it was in Europe and we couldn't get the scope locked down. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to meet with the CEO. And I literally met with the guy and I said, listen, I'm going to give you all your money back and I'm going to give you the code and we'll help transition you, but we can't go on. And you know why we can't go on? Because I have some really excellent people that are going to quit and I can't afford them to quit. So I'm literally going to give you all your money back and I'm going to help you transition. I want you to be successful, but we can't go on like that.
I think I remember that.
And it was it was crazy. And he's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And let's talk about this. But it was kind of like, do the right thing and what's fair. And that's what I thought was fair at that time. And then he said, well, let's get involved. You and I will sit down every call and we'll make sure we lock the scope down and we'll make this work. And we did make it work. But golly, that was painful. And it wasn't, I wouldn't say it was a risky conversation because I was willing to do it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but there was a rationality that I was trying to bring to my business to say, what's right for the customer? And if it hurts us, if it's our fault, we deserve to be hurt. I don't mean, if we messed up, we have to fix it. And so from the beginning, I was kind of like, why wouldn't everyone make, a satisfaction guarantee? Because if I messed it up and you came to me, I'm like, of course I'm going to fix it and I'm not going to charge you. Of course. So when we said okay, we have the satisfaction guarantee, everyone's like, how can you do that? That's crazy. I'm like, how is that crazy? It's just doing the right thing.
Yeah.
If you want your business to have any kind of integrity, right? Like when you make a mistake, you make a mistake. When you don't, then you have a conversation because their reality is different than your reality and try to contain, I guess. I'm a big contain kind of guy, contain the tornado that's going on in here because I got a lot going on that I want to tell you, but I'm going to contain it and be like, let's take the higher, what's best and what's fair.
That's helpful. Funny, I just got finished watching for the second time the Uber documentary, right? And it ends with this, literally one of the last things in it is about, all the kind of craziness that happened between the head VC and the chairman of the board and Kalanick. And it ends with, a comment about your last name, right? At the end of the day, you walk out the door and the only thing you take with you is your last name. And, reflecting on some of the hard decisions I've had to make this year,
Right.
Interesting customer challenges that we've had to navigate, right? It is true. All you can do is make the decision that you can live with.
Yeah.
Right. And
no, absolutely.
Right or wrong is binary, but the world isn't binary. So right or wrong is going to be from where you're sitting.
Exactly. And that's what we kind of had to, and I'm saying global, we had to shift that perspective. And everyone says it, but, so it's kind of trite, but put yourself in the customer's shoes. What are they dealing with? And see it differently because everyone's not seeing it the same way we are. Yep. And I tried to get across, and you were kind of saying it earlier, in terms of the individual versus red van. Every interaction you have with a customer, an email, a phone call, you are representing Red. And you are creating our brand every time you speak to a customer. So you have to be aware of that. So that's that individual versus collective, like the company. Like I wanted everyone to be aware, like I want every customer to feel better after having engaged with us.
Yeah,
cool. And that's back to what you were saying, Harvey, we added value. We did something right. And sometimes that right could be, what you just said, TJ, turning down a project because that was the right thing to do for the customer. You're telling them the truth. You're not overextending. And so I think that was the gist of what we tried to build. And over time, it kind of grew, right? With our people, in our people, and with our customers, and, and that community, that is and was Demandware was very tight. Customers knew each other. They liked talking to each other. Exchange was amazing. I mean,
exchange was like incredible. I reflect back on that first exchange where we didn't charge anyone, right? We did it in that hotel. And I want to say 95% of the content had to come from me, Sean, and Claire. Like it was like literally like just, and no model, right? No, there's no model for it. SaaS vendors didn't exist. User groups didn't exist. We did it because it felt right and, was empowered enough. All right, TJ, tell me something that you don't think I know. I have this, well, and let me say it this way. I have this perception of my time at Demandware, right? The various roles I played, the people I worked for and worked with, the clients I interacted with. That's like my eyes, but I don't know what it looked like from the outside. I was an albatross. I mean, Barnett had no idea what to do with me, right? I was a thorn in Troy's side. Like, we were like oil and water, right? We like each other personally, but like it was a lot of friction, right? I hired a lot of people that went on to do a lot of different things, but none of them really worked for me for a long time because I kind of went to just be Callahan's lackey. I would love to hear something that you don't think I know.
Well, it's funny because when I my second time meeting Jeff was when he came up to basically kick us off the Gardeners project. So, and Musil, and I mean, I knew Tom and all of them, but I didn't know Philip or Callahan or Barnett or any of those guys. Like they were the new guys. Like the first time I met Jeff, and he came from whatever that paper thin or white paper. What was it?
He was at Siebel.
No, he came out of an.
I don't know where he was before, like between.
Yeah, yeah. He was at some place he got acquired. He was like the new guy that had been through the acquisition process, and he was all walking on his tiptoes and with his chin in the air a little bit. Him and I didn't get along right out of the gate, like not at all. So when he came up to chat with me, that was pretty much over before a syllable got spoken. But my time was earlier than that. I don't know that there's anything you don't know. I mean, I started when it was just Marco, Ulrika, and Wayne, and then Dave. Who's Wayne's secret little weapon? Was it Dave?
Dave Boyle.
Yeah, there was Dave.
I believe Dave is still involved. Like that guy, if he doesn't exist, their ability to repair a pod is materially impacted.
Well, we got a phone call because Stefan basically moved here, and he sort of just called the general number, and I'm like, how did you find us? He's like, well, I asked around in Boston, like, who was the best agency to work with for product design. It wasn't agency stuff. There was no agency concept back then. And he's like, everybody I talked to brought you guys up. Because remember, we were doing a lot of product back then. Like we did the original Sonos when they were called Rincon. We did Nokia's first MMS application, which is what we just call regular text messaging now. So Stefan actually came up. He's like, I want to come up and meet with you.
So let me pivot.
Yeah.
How the heck did you get into the media business with your background? Like I don't understand how you got hired. And I heard your interview with Dylan, right? I still don't understand how you actually got hired at Cabletron.
Well, Cabletron.
Like, how did that? Like, dude, like no imagination. Could you get hired for a job today with that background at Cabletron?
No, I got hired at Cabletron for $5.50 an hour working in the stockroom.
Okay, that I didn't know that, right?
And what had actually happened was I actually lost my job in Dover because I got arrested and I was in the paper.
So now this makes sense.
So I get arrested, and it's in the paper, and I get out, and then I go back to they arrest me on a Friday so they can hold me over the weekend, and I go back on Monday, and I lost my job, and I ended up having no money and no apartment and nothing. I was literally the last dollar. My girlfriend at the time was like helping me pay rent, and her sister worked at this place called Cabletron up in Rochester, and Cabletron was like fucking Guam to me because it was Rochester. I remember I don't have a car. I have
Yeah,
a
yeah.
license only because I'm 18, and I got a job up there in the stockroom. And
Were you there when all the shenanigans were going on that eventually led to all kinds of crazy stuff later on in life?
yeah, you mean all of the false paperwork and backdating and all of that?
Yeah, yeah.
No, I had
With
actually
governors
left.
taken down and
Well, those are all people I was very close and friendly with. So that
gotcha.
happened when I was over at Pixel, and they were all my customers. So
Okay.
Cabletron became a customer, and Terrasys became a customer eventually. Prisma became a customer. But let's go to back to the multi.
How did you like learn to like put your fingers on a keyboard and type something that was like packaged and sold?
Yeah, no, interesting story. So I'm in the stockroom and I meet a lady who has to keep coming and getting like programmable ICs from me, right? I don't know what they are. I just know they're tubes of ICs. They're through hole ICs. And her name is Sandy Weston. I actually think she still lives in Dover. And I'm like, I get to know her. I'm like, hey, what do you do? She's like, I'm a release engineer. So long story short, I end up moving out of the stockroom down to the docks, and I was the guy if things weren't product related. To like if you got a book or a laptop or something personal for you anywhere in Cabletron, I had to bring it to you. It was like a special area. I got to know a lot of people. I got to know Sandy, so had a little bit of charisma in my youth, and
You lost all of it.
she left that job, and she goes, "Hey, my job. Would you want to do this job?" And I fucking said yes. It was on the other side of the wall. That's where people wore white shirts and had pens and pencils and shit. I was a blue collar kid, dude. I haven't even told the story. Like I didn't even eat. I got to eat one meal a day for like years. I just wasn't sure which one it was. It was always ramen. I just never knew when it was going to be during the
Beef
day.
or pork?
So I fucking go in for the interview, and this guy, because Sandy vouches for me, or boss, and everybody kind of knew me because I was the kid that was always walking around delivering shit to everybody. And I got high. He asked me if I knew how to use a computer, and I fucking lied, and I said yeah. So he hired me as a release engineer. And on my first day on the job, I think I told this on Dylan's podcast, the girl that took over for Sandy like gives me a bunch of stuff, and she's like, do a disk copy. And I'm like, I don't even know what those words mean. She's like, a disk copy, do a disk copy. Now I'm on like a fucking 286, right? With like 4 mega RAM, and it's got two 3.5-inch floppies and two 5 1/4s, right? That's literally what the
Yeah.
fucking thing is. So the job was actually making copies of software disks, whether it was 3.5
Yeah.
or floppies. And then the proms that Sandy was getting was because there was a little machine there that you put the proms in. And what happened is engineering would give me the latest build of something, and I would burn the proms. I'd have to burn 16 of them and then deliver them to all the departments. So I was as a release engineer, which I lied, I literally still knew all these people. So I would like go around and bring them all the stuff. And then Microsoft Paint was out. And I was like, what is this fucking thing? So I just started fucking around with Microsoft Paint while the thing was disk copying, because when you're making this stuff, you can't do anything. And I just started drawing one pixel at a time. Next thing you know, I hear a dude upstairs. His job is he draws on the computer. I actually take his job eventually, like literally probably 4 months later. I finally get to know him. I find a friend of a friend. I finally, he gets promoted. He asked me if I want to do his job. I end up taking his job. And then a bigwig one day, we came out with fiber. It was called the FDM MIM. And it was the first time Ethernet was only 10 megabit and fiber was 100. And he literally came to me and he's like, hey, I heard you're the graphic dude. And I'm like, I'm the graphic dude. Now, you got to remember, I'm 145 pounds, long hair, mustache, clean shaven mustache. I probably have photos. He's like, well, we're going to this trade show. Do you know of anything that would generate enough bandwidth to take up bandwidth so we could show this 100 megabit thing? Because at the time, nothing moved that fast. You could never fill 100 megabit, which you couldn't anyway. You could only get to about 30%. So it was 30 meg, more technical uselessness. And QuickTime 1.0 had just got released. So I talked him into buying me a fucking Quadra 950 and all the Macromedia shit. And I did a fucking little 160 by 120 video that ran at a trade show. And that was my foray into multimedia.
Damn.
Oh my gosh.
Anyway, it goes.
I finally now can connect the dots of how
gets
TJ
more.
actually got into Cabletron,
That's classic.
and it makes sense. But I was like,
I got into Cabletron for like
and then it's just your
525,
nature.
$5.50 an hour in the stock room, basically kidding. So back then it was all through hole circuit boards that you ran through a soldering machine. So I literally put the kits together so that they could put these PC boards together to make the networking equipment. That was literally my job. So,
That's
and
all.
I think I'd already told you, I got fired / laid off from my job before after a brief stint in
In jail. That's the truth. In
involuntary
jail.
involuntary hold as an 18-year-old.
Cool. All right, one last question I got. If you guys could go anywhere in the world with anyone, who and where and
Past, present, and future, place and person.
let's keep it present day.
Fuck. If I could go anywhere in the world with anyone, well, I would naturally pick my wife.
You better say that or you might get punched.
Well, she just came down to tell me I'm going to be late for my haircut, but she's running 15 minutes behind. So if I could go anywhere in the world, I would probably go do 3 months in Asia Pacific because it's
Just
a place.
touring around.
It's a place I've never been. I would love to do all of Japan. I would love to do Thailand.
You've never been to Japan?
No. I used to read
Interesting.
hundreds of Vietnam War books, like hundreds. I still have them upstairs. I'd love to go do Vietnam. I'd love to go do Thailand. I'd love to do that whole area. Never done any of that.
I would
Richard?
say, I mean, it's funny you asked that, and it's kind of checking off my bucket list, but Gertrude and I, my wife and I both turn 60 next year. And it's our 35th wedding anniversary. We got married in 1990, if my math is right. We are, and she was like, oh, we're going to have a party and whatever. And I'm not a big, don't mind having parties for other people. I just don't like having parties for myself. So I said, let's go on a trip. We're going to do Machu Picchu in Peru. And that one's on my list. And so you're asking at a time where I'm like, we're going to do it next year. I figured being 60 is a good time to do it because you can still hike it. You can do like a 3-day, kind of Sherpa hike, but go see Machu Picchu, but still be physical enough. Like, my knees are good. I can still, actually do it. So, and I can't think of a better person to do it with and kind of a celebration of us together, but also our 60, being 60 years on this earth. So and I've never been in South America. I've never touched foot on South America, so I'm excited to kind of have an adventure and also, a little spiritual in nature and ancient ruins, which we both like. So we're going to do
Non-spouse? Can I do a non-spouse?
Yeah, of course.
I would love to be with Trump, Musk, and RFK for the first 90 days of them going into office and just be part of what I can only assume is going to be absolute insanity. I would love an inside view on how realistic are these changes going to be and how realistic are these conversations going to be and are we really going to do some of these things that we need to do. I'm not talking about all the bad negative stuff that all of the naysayers are talking about. I'm talking about the actual really important things like, can we please stop fucking poisoning every human that comes over our borders, please, with the food? Like, that's a whole issue. Harvey, I don't know if you paid attention, but I changed my life about probably a year ago, October. Can we stop doing that? And can we stop wasting money? And can we stop politicking the most basic of things that while we neglect basic needs here in the States?
Yeah.
I would pay money for that. I would pay an enormous amount of money to go do that.
Knowing the three of them, if they're not documenting it, it would be very surprising.
Yeah, but they're what
we see will be somebody's version of that story,
correct.
Right?
What happens and what we're willing to tell is different.
Yep.
Like even on this call, this is a call we know we recorded. Like we could go into some pretty crazy dialogues here. We were all very, political.
The second one, we'll have to get into some more stories because we have a lot.
Well, yeah, Harvey's one of our fellow historians. and
A
another
lot of stories.
unrecognized legend in the industry. And dude, I'm so proud of you being on the agency side.
Thanks.
I think I joked to you, it's a big difference, asking for checks versus writing them. But dude, I love what you're doing over there. I love, I know you made some tough fucking calls. I know what that's like. I've been there. I feel for you for that. But I'm so proud to see that you've made that transition, and I talk to you enough to stay in touch. And I love what you're doing. I love what you're trying to do. I love the pivot that you guys are making over there. I'm
Me
proud of
too.
you, dude. It's fun to watch. I'm looking forward to watching it more. I think it's barely getting going. I think 25, 26 is going to be pretty interesting for everybody. It's where the wheat and the chaff are going to separate pretty quickly for all those that don't have their
Agreed.
head on straight.
And I appreciate you taking care of my kids, so thank you for that.
Fuck,
Yeah,
that's right. I forgot about that.
it's really cool, Rich, because you get a perspective. You have access to a perspective, not from me, right?
Yeah.
That you and I have kept, I think, pretty good at keeping it separated.
Yeah, for sure.
But it also keeps me honest, because it's another thing that keeps me honest and authentic, right? Because it's like, I'm just, if I act in an honest, authentic, and trustworthy way, the action is kind of irrelevant.
Correct.
Right. And so, and
So it's been
good
great.
things
And
will
I've
eventually happen.
appreciated you calling me and keeping me included and separating Hannah and me. I think it's great, and I very much appreciate it.
Well, as you guys know, and those, Shannon or, Megan, who now works for us, and, my network is everything. I mean, I said it in a couple of weeks ago on LinkedIn, right? Like, the people I've met along this journey, are really, really important to me. And I try to respect the importance of those relationships and both benefit from them and give people opportunity, right?
Your network is your currency, and
It is.
anybody that doesn't write that statement down and put it on a sticker behind their monitor is
Your network is your net worth, right?
chasing fool's gold. Well, I think
And shit, like, the only reason I am in this store today is because I decided to expand my network by cold outreach some CEO that, claimed to have invented the shopping cart.
it's a beautiful story.
It's a beautiful story.
It is.
And, and for whatever reason, in a meeting I'm not privy to, right? He went to the board and they said, okay.
Hey, it's all good. Listen, guys, we got to wrap it up here. We're coming up on 2 hours. I actually am only wrapping it up because I have a haircut that I have to drive over to. Otherwise, I'd stay here. But I won't come back all riched up. But I'll be
You're not
somewhere.
going to take it down?
I got a primp. I mean, it's you can't tell, but it's unusually long right now.
I
like it. I think it's.
I got called into jury duty the other day. I had to take my hat off. It was very uncomfortable.
My son wore a hat at my wedding. Listen, Harvey, I super appreciate you coming on, dude. Good to see you. Like I said,
Same
so
here.
proud of what you're doing over there, and proud of the turn, and proud of the organization that you're able to represent as well. I'm watching. I think you guys are doing good things. I think
Thank you.
25 is going to be a magical year for you. Rich, I love you down in Mexico. I'll be there in a couple of weeks. I'll come down with you after NRF, but only if you fly in private.
Yeah, for sure. I'll fly you down after.
All right. For anyone listening, welcome to another episode of Tea with Rich, with special guest Harvey Bierman, a friend of 20 years, and hope everyone has a great day. But
Thanks, man.
bye,
Thanks,
y'all.
guys. Thanks, Harvey.